Live from Harbor Station, it's the Vector Spaceman Show. Now here's your host, Vector Spaceman.
Hello, Space Cadets. Today is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. The Wednesday evening Vector Spaceman Show podcast type diddly-do begins right now. Welcome back to the program, Space Cadets. And if it's your first time tuning in tonight, welcome aboard. I'm Vector Spaceman. This is the Vector Spaceman Show. Tonight, I am joined in studio by our lovely guests and co-hosts, Misters Dregn and Azabiel. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
How is it going? Thanks for being here, you guys. The topic du jour, my lads. The matter of a once mighty titan, its ruins strewn bare upon the most ethereal net, now but the ragged sport of vermin, vultures, and verily, people who spend far too much time on the internet. We're talking RPGs and such tonight, you guys. A topic.
We love RPGs.
Which I was about to say, which pertains to all of us. We love RPGs, don't we?
I mean,
absolutely.
There's also, the greatest overlap of nerds that are VTubers. So, it works out.
It works out pretty well. You're absolutely right. Now, for those who might not be aware, Dregn, you run your own little weekly RPG session over on your channel. We'll do a little shout out in the chat here. Dregn, make sure you're checking him out. A sci-fi themed adventure, which is sort of a modest coat of paint on top of the standard, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition rule set.
Yeah, maybe this will actually segue in during our conversation later with some of the things that I'm sure we're very excited to complain about.
Oh, most definitely, most definitely.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a campaign called Horizon Exploration. We took an extended break during the holidays, and we're hoping to kick it back up this Sunday. But yeah, it was a weekly campaign, sci-fi themed, as we do on our channel, and very loosely using 5th edition as a kind of just a foundational set of rules, right? A place to start. So
a framework.
Yeah, exactly. And we love homebrews. We love improvising. We love having story-driven sessions and character development. So I definitely approach these games more from a going on an adventure, and you just have someone trying to coordinate everything that's happening and keeping an enjoyable time for the players, but less of I know there's some folks out there who will approach 5th edition or just these types of tabletop games more as like a board game, right? Where you just follow the rules, you play the game, and it's you have combat. Yeah, so we definitely lean more in the homebrew improvising storytelling aspect, but it's a lot of fun. Come check it out.
Well, that's probably one of the best ways to play. And for those of you who also might not be aware, Azabiel is what you might call a professional dungeon master himself. You do this as a source of income, as it were.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've over a year now, just over a year, been doing this, running games professionally for people through Start Playing, and it's been going well, and it's a great way to take what I enjoy doing, what I do well, and make a living off of it. I've been fortunate that it's worked out as well as it has.
Now, here's a question for you, As, because this is something that I've wondered about. People who do make a career, as it were, out of game mastering, dungeon mastering, whatever you'd like to call it, is how do you find it affects your relationship with the game? Has it lost some of its luster now that it's become work? Do you find that it's, tarnished the experience in any sort of way? Or is it just, everything you ever could have dreamed of? You finally get the opportunity to, do what you love to do full time? Is it everything you could have asked for and more?
I mean, right out the gate, and saying that, in that experience, you don't have so much to go off of. But right out the gate, it felt incredible being able to kind of shift and do that. And I think that there is a way you could do this. You could be a professional GM and have it kill your love of the game. But I've taken the care to make sure that the people that I'm running games for are people that I can do so and enjoy the game as well, and still enjoy the experience and put my all into it. It's not something where it's detracted from the experience for me. But I could definitely see, if I was a little bit more loose about who I ran games for and all of that, then I could definitely see it being something where it would have a bit of a detriment to the experience for me. But no, it's definitely been more in the vein of all I've ever wanted and more.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up there about sort of curating who it is that you run games for. How have you experienced that with, I guess, the difference between players as, I guess, collaborators, as participants, versus players as customers? Have you run into any issues with that?
I haven't, no. I have started changing how I run my games to a certain extent. Mostly in the kind of the run up to actually starting a campaign. I do things a little bit differently. I take a little bit more care than I used to. But to some degree, I think you have to keep in mind, right, that these are people that are putting in their own investments for the experience. Because if you don't think about that at all, then you run the risk of, not giving them the experience that they paid for. But from what I've done, the relationship between the players and myself doesn't really feel too different from if I were just running a game for friends.
I think it would be a little different too, because one, due to the nature of the hobby, right? You are still, even if it's a business of sort, framed as a business, a transaction of, hey, I'm paying you to run us a game. A bunch of people, the quality of people that you'd get who are willing to even play D&D to begin with, or desire to play D&D. I imagine that filters a lot of your general goofballs out of that picture. Yeah. Not to mention, everyone there who is in a position to pay for such a game likely has a particular type of schedule that they're operating around, which is, I would assume, one of the reasons why they're willing to pay is for a consistent set of expectations walking in, a certain expectation of a degree of quality and organization. Right. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's still a bunch of nerds playing D&D, right? So I imagine, they're the transaction aside, it's still a group of people having a good time at the table. And I would imagine the kind of interaction before game, after game, and the relationship between the person running, in this case, as here, and the players is going to be largely, I suppose, defined by the GM and how he handles the game and how he handles those relationships and how open he is with the players, right? But yeah, what's your firsthand take on that? Yeah,
that bit at the tail end there, I think you might be right. I do try to between when I'm picking players and when I'm interacting with them, do try to maintain kind of a friendly, more casual feeling atmosphere. I think, if people don't feel like they're in a job interview, they're probably more likely to enjoy the experience. But at the beginning, you said something which kind of relates to something that I say to players a lot of the time, which is that the investment, in my opinion, as I feel, incentivizes both the players and myself as the GM or other professional GMs to be more, for lack of a better word, I'll just use the same one, be more invested in the game and the experience, right? Not only in this situation is everyone putting in their time to enjoy this game with everyone. But now people are putting in their money, so they're a little bit more. There's a little bit more on the line, as it were, and so people are a little bit more focused and there for the game experience, as opposed to like your more casual. What do people call like a beer and pretzels kind of gaming session? People are definitely more invested, I think, because of that.
That's exactly the word I was just going to say. Invested. You're right. Well, that's excellent to hear. Yeah, I've just only ever heard, I guess, and read these potential horror stories of what can happen when you start, treating it as an exchange, as a business, as a enterprise, as it were. So that everything is going well for you. I'm super pleased to hear it. But thank you for sharing those little anecdotes. I'm glad that it hasn't, caused you to lose a love of the game or nothing.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of losing our love for the game, gentlemen, shall we discuss latest news in the world of tabletop role-playing games? We are, of course, referring to the present issues surrounding Dungeons & Dragons, the iconic tabletop role-playing game presently owned by Wizards of the Coast, the iconic American game publisher presently owned by Hasbro, the iconic multinational conglomerate with ties to oh so many iconic games and toys. Now, for those of you unaware, yes, the Dungeons & Dragons brand, as well as its public reputation, has taken a serious beating owing to corporate mismanagement and perhaps errant greed. We'll be discussing some of those decisions which have led us to where we are today. So, the latest state of affairs. Last week or so, just over a week or so ago, we started to get these, leaked copies of confidential agreements relating to an updated version of what's called the OGL, the Open Gaming License, which is a set of, how would you call it, publishing permissions, published by Wizards of the Coast for creating supplementary game products, aids, adventure modules, things like that, to go along with the Dungeons & Dragons series of role-playing games. Something that got started all the way back in the year 2000, so it's actually been with us for quite a while in various iterations. Older, in fact, than some of our viewers, even, if you can believe that. So it's been around for a while now, and this idea that it's going to be updated to a new version, a more radical version that is going to drastically change the permissions that content creators, if you'd like to call them that, publishers, third-party publishers, how they're allowed to engage with the Dungeons & Dragons brand. And suffice it to say, fellas, it probably did not go as well as Wizards of the Coast had planned, did it?
They had a plan.
I think
we weren't supposed to know about the plan. It was their plan.
I suppose that's true. Yes.
Yeah, not going the way they hoped, I think, is maybe putting it lightly.
So, what is the future that D&D has charted for itself at this point? Do you think? First of all, what is your take, I suppose, Dregn and Az, on some of the new restrictions that have been put in place by this hypothetical? Or perhaps, how would you say, aspirational OGL 2.0 or 1.1, or however they'd like to title it.
So,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I feel like, as far as the content of the draft, I don't like that it's being called a draft. I think that's ridiculous.
You think they ought to just own up to being, that they got caught, essentially, that they've been found out.
Yeah, but if they openly put that on themselves, then it's a whole thing. But anyway, I feel like I said this to Dregn when we were playing Minecraft. I've said it to people off stream as well. The wording throughout it just feels so cartoon villain-like, which, you know, is that kind of cartoon villain writing. I mean, a lot of it, I think, probably comes from the way that you know, this kind of stuff is just written anyway. But just when you need 5 or 6 extra words to express just how much the creators don't own the content that Wizards is claiming that they would own is kind of crazy.
Well, that's legalese for you, I suppose. Dregn, you know a thing or two about that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing kind of stems because I don't recall if it was investors or stakeholders or what the deal was, but they looked at the brand of Dungeons and Dragons like, oh man, dude, like this could be monetized way more efficiently, way more. And so they started making this draft of how they could, you know, take steps for that purpose of growth. And I don't know if any news has come out of how much of a hand Hasbro had in the decision-making process of Wizards of the Coast monetizing D&D. But I would imagine, because we've seen the same process happen in the gaming industry, right? Activision with Blizzard is I think, a very key example that can be compared to. But
trying to appease stakeholders or something.
Exactly, right? Because Activision, in this case, Hasbro, has clear, you know, stakeholders, shareholders that they have to adhere to, you know, as a company with private interests, public interests, and whatnot. And it wouldn't surprise me if we learn that Wizards of the Coast is just the scapegoat, in the unfortunate position where they had to move the business in this direction, which this is, again, what I kind of have come to not secretly despise about the business world, is that they've lost sight of customers, because rather than looking at who they are serving and who their product and services are serving and what it brings to the lives of the people that those product and services serve, they are now instead stuck in this kind of pharaoh position where they're getting slapped by, you know, the pharaoh telling them, you must do this, you must do that, we must, you know, build this great pyramid type situation. So in the pyramid, in this case, for business, being growth, right? It's all about growth in the business world, and it's frankly tiring for me.
Short-sighted, you would say.
Yeah. I would argue that it is strongly short-sighted, right? It's like, oh, do we want year-over-year growth, or do we want a prosperous business that is shared openly, willingly by the people who use it and enjoy it across the next 10, 20, 30 years, which Dungeons and Dragons has had that benefit for the past 10 years. And to see the business kind of creep in and these decisions really just be like, you know what, they've already increased monetization through the book release cycles, the quality of the books they're releasing. D&D Beyond has been a massive success, which has been widely, freely promoted by a lot of people in the community because it brings so much value to making it easier to make a character and making resources in a central place. But, you know, when we take all of when we look behind the veil, it's just like, well, what do you guys actually want out of all this? Oh, we want more, is what I'm hearing. It's like, well, to what end, right? So, yeah, I don't buy it for one bit. It doesn't surprise me that we saw this kind of stuff come out, the OGL leaks come out. It doesn't surprise me that we're seeing like email leaks coming out. It doesn't surprise me that any of this is happening. And the response doesn't surprise me one bit either, because frankly, this kind of stuff has been happening for many years in even like the terms of use, the terms of service on many of the platforms and services that a lot of us out there use. And who actually goes in and reads that stuff, right? No one does. So
in the sense of becoming more restrictive, you mean?
Restrictive, or really just the business or the service covering their rear, right? And really we get the short end of the stick if anything were to happen. So really this OGL license it's a license, right? So it's really no different than a terms of service license that we all agree to when we use various platforms like Twitch.
In a sense, yeah.
In a sense, right? But all of these licenses, guess who they go through? They go through a legal team to make it all jargony and, you know, messy, and the people who are directing them to write it is going to be all your business folks and decision makers. And who's telling them what to do? Well, it comes down from, again, those stakeholders and investors and business wigs who are looking to satisfy those interests for the sake of growth. And anyways, I'm on my soapbox again. Let me get off of here.
Well, I saw I had read a humorous little comment, if we might piggyback off what you just said about the sort of dense legalese involved in some of these agreements, which was that they're trying to pull one over on people who spend a lot of their time arguing very detailed rules and rules lawyering and what have you. And in this case, people are just starting to see past it, see through it. They're prepped for this sort of thing.
Oh yeah, the past few years has been great for that, right? People putting out all this kind of I don't want to lightly use the term woke, because there's a lot of political BS that is attached to that word now, but the fact that we're seeing all this messaging that just comes across disingenuous, right?
Oh, I see.
Because of our access to it now and the ability to share across the internet, more people are seeing and noticing and becoming aware and sharing ideas. And I feel that it's gone on for so long that we're starting to get an idea of the man behind the curtain. So
all right. Now, of course, Wizards of the Coast not having a banger year outside of this Dungeons and Dragons debacle either. You said earlier how much influence parent company Hasbro might have on some of their latest decision making. Earlier in the year, Wizards of the Coast, of course, embroiled in more debacles, sort of mishandling their 30th anniversary celebration for their flagship Magic the Gathering series. Did not go as well as planned. Overcharging products, not shipping enough of this and that, not enough customer demand, and ultimately, I think that it's impacted a lot of their goodwill. Now, and perhaps two of their... Oh, look at this. We've got a little comment in the chat. Meg over here, of course, big fan of the Magic the Gathering series. The game. OMG, the MTG30 proxies. Yeah, have you two heard about that at all?
I'm not super huge on the Magic the Gathering, but I do believe that there is far too much business and people who work for these businesses who they're not willing to take the risk of new ideas, so they try to milk a quote unquote working idea for as long as they could. I mean, card games I had a phase of my life where I was super big on board games, and through that scene, I mean, there is a churn of very unique card games that are coming out every year. The fact that a large, widely accepted and popular game that has a ton of nostalgia and a ton of people who are still very big fans of it, and a very interesting, I don't know if you call it a gray market for the cards. It's not really gray, I suppose, but the fact that Magic has been alive for 30 years in and of itself should have been a time for just pure celebration. And the fact that they had to do anything to just botch it is mind-blowing to me. But at the same time, my original point getting into this one was I feel like they are willing to beat that horse until it is long dead. and I sometimes question why. We see this in animation, we see this in games, we see this in film. So, yeah.
Well, let me paint a picture for you here, Dragon, and for listeners at home who might not be aware of it as well. So the year is 1992, 1993. We're seeing the release of the first series of Magic the Gathering cards. Wildly successful, right out the gate. People love it. And as the years go on, inevitably you get expansion series for your card game. You get new booster packs, you get new starter decks, this and that. You start reprinting older cards. At some point, somebody gets the grand idea that we are going to limit the production of some of our earliest cards so as to increase their overall rarity. We're never going to print them again, signed and sealed. Cross our hearts and hope to die, that sort of thing. ultimately they could renege on that decision at any point. But it gets people, a secondary card market going, if you will. Card shops, they'll start to, jack up the price on these rare cards, that sort of thing. Because they know they're never going to be reprinted in any later editions, in any later starter decks or booster packs or anything like that. So it becomes, a point of pride if I've got one of the earliest first edition diddly-doos. You often hear about, for example, the Black Lotus cards from the original series go for tens, if sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the quality. Now, 30 years later, the company decides, all right, we changed our mind, kind of, but not really. But here's the caveat. We're going to, because it's the 30th year anniversary, we're going to reprint the original set of Magic the Gathering. All those cards we told you we were never going to print again. But we're going to charge you for it. We're going to charge you $1,000, Dragon. 1000 decimal 00 1,000 American dollars, to say nothing of, non-stateside fans like myself. American dollars, 1,000 USD, and you are going to get 4 packs of cards. A pack of cards being 15.
Okay.
And then, to top it all off, because we said that we are never going to reprint these cards, here's our caveat. These are just going to be proxy cards, technically. These are not going to be game legal cards. They're in the shape of Magic cards. They're on the same card stock as Magic cards. They come in the same aluminum foil packaging as Magic cards. They've got all the old images, all the old card text, everything you would expect to see on them. They're in the same dimensions, the same shapes. You could fit them right into your existing decks, and nobody would know the difference, except that, actually, I'm not even sure what the issue was. Either the border was a different color, or there was a different image on the back of the card. One of the two. But the point is that
they modernized it.
Yeah, but the point is that they are not considered tournament legal. So you are getting what is effectively a $1,000 price tag on 4 packs of cards that A, collectors don't want because they're not the real deal. B, players don't want because they're not considered tournament legal. You can't put them in your existing decks. Yep. So really, they're only good for, I don't know, playing with your friends maybe, or
they're not good for anything.
Well, ultimately, what they became good for was speculation. You'd get people buying up packs under the idea that, oh well, maybe I'll be able to flip these down the line. Maybe they'll be worth something. But ultimately, it doesn't seem like they're going to be.
Yeah, it's artificially created value, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah. If it's not playable and if it has no tournament value, it's a card game. Like if it has no game value, they're just feeding on collector mentality because they know there's a market of players who are willing to spend, right? They're going after your whales, basically, as we know in the gaming community.
It almost seems like some executive saw how much, read a story about, oh, Black Lotus sells for such and such amount of money, and they thought, hey, now, how come we're not getting any of that inflated price? And they thought to themselves, well, geez, we'll do it ourselves. We'll jack up the price and we'll sell it right to the consumer.
Yeah, how it touches that.
I feel like misconception on the business side of things like that is kind of where both of these issues come from, the MTG as well as the D&D. I think it's them not understanding their own product.
Or their customers.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Now imagine this, fellas. Imagine this. We're going to do something very similar. We're going to reprint that initial wave of Magic the Gathering cards, and they're still going to be not tournament legal. We change the borders, we change the back, we do whatever we have to. Non-tournament legal cards. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell them for $5 a pack. Just like in the good old days. And then, isn't that just something fun to do? To collect, the old stuff. Yeah. You can play with them. You get your friends together. Yeah, we're going to buy a bunch of packs or boosters or whatever.
Yeah,
We're
you
gonna
know what
play
that
like
would remind me of?
like it's back, like it's party, like it's 1993.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what that reminds me of is it, yeah, if they make it cheaper, it's like, okay, we're doing this for the community because there's people who want access to these cards.
But they didn't.
We're not going to make a tournament legal due to the implications of you know, past cards and the value of the past cards, and to be respectful for the people who own them, you know, properly and responsibly and through the legal means or through the aftermarket and whatnot. But that would remind me way more of like Pokemon. Pokemon, I think, had a few of those movies, right, where they would give out a trading card, and I don't recall which
I remember
ones were
those
legal and which ones weren't. But you're basically getting a card for the price of admission, right? It's like, yeah, it's a little bonus. It's, you know, for the 30-year anniversary. You know, obviously it costs money to make these cards. So I mean, hell, I think people would have even approached it at a $10 or a $20 price tag.
fractions of a cent to make these cards.
Yeah, the fact that they went to $1,000 is so just
scummy, just scumbaggy.
Yeah, to take advantage of people. It's what it is. And gosh, I really wish I understood the mindset of the people who can be in business, who is a part of these companies. Like, did you really not join the company because you wanted to? Like, I can imagine, you know, the business world being a little different when it comes to like the Wall Street side and the financial sector and the tech sector. But when it comes to hobby sectors like card games and board games and video games, you know, the creative stuff, I feel like you joined those companies because you grew up with those types of deals, or you wanted to, you know, expand on it or build on it or make it better. I get that once you get above a certain point, running the company, regardless of the type of company, you will see, as long as the company grows to a certain extent, above a certain, I don't know, above a certain point, it just becomes people coming in to manage the company, right? And they come from all over the place. Like this happened at the last place that I had worked at, which went from a small organization of 200 people. They grew, they went public. And after they went public, they started bringing in people from the outside rather than bringing up people from the inside. And the people coming from the outside are people who had experience and success or a track record or resume of building a organization and making it a bigger, sustainable organization, right? So I feel this is some of the issues that we see in gaming, in the hobby vertical, I suppose, where yeah, they've grown to an extent, like the business has grown to an extent where it is now a business, not a hobby for a lot of the people who work there. So the out of touch aspect, I can understand, but it's just like, what happened to the core values of this organization that made it exist in the first place? I feel like once you get to that point, those values just kind of get sidelined. And I saw this happen at my last place too. And it's it hurts my heart, man. I don't know what to do about it. I wish I could, but
see, I doubt that the people making those sort of decisions, those sort of short-sighted, short-term, immediate growth decisions, are very invested in, you know, the history of something like a card game or an RPG or something like that. They're not quite but involved in, you know, I'm sure whoever decided on the $1,000 4-pack price tag, you know, is not playing the game very often, if at all, that sort of thing. Meg over here making an excellent point. It's just old art that they already had the rights to. It's even cheaper because they didn't have to pay for the art. They just slap it on the cardboard. Indeed. Yeah. It could have been an event, a community event, but instead, well, this is what happens and continues to happen. Making all the wrong moves this year, Wizard of the Coast.
Yeah, it should be a free win. It should be a free win.
It should be a free win.
They did something wild with it.
Yeah, you hate to see it.
I mean, maybe just when they get over, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, they stop understanding the value of those lengths of time. I don't know, because like you said, this the OGL 2000, just over 20 years, and it's kind of burning down now. I mean, obviously,
the history of the OGL is actually quite interesting, and it sort of paints a picture of how these new moves might play out. So, Dregn and Az, when did you guys get into Dungeons and Dragons?
I'd say 2016, 17 probably is.
Yeah, 2015, 2016 for me, like actively. Prior to that, here and there, but nothing.
So you both would have started with 5th edition then, one presumes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, and have you ever tried any of the older editions?
Didn't see a reason to.
All right, well, I didn't see. All right, well, anyways, let's take a jaunt through history here.
Little bit here and there.
So back in 2000, the reason that the OGL gets started back in 2000, this is the launch of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. Sort of what we would call the most recognizably modern iteration of Dungeons & Dragons. If you tried to go back and play 3rd edition, you would find it very similar to 5th edition. You wouldn't have a hard time figuring out what's going on. But they come out with this OGL, lets other publishers, create modules and adventures and, source books, bestiaries, all sorts of fun stuff that makes the game more fun. And it really, helps the game take off. In fact, this is where you start to see the emergence of the D20 system as, a sort of ubiquitous RPG. It becomes like a brand name sort of thing, like Ziploc, like Kleenex, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
D20 becomes big. You see the old Star Wars D20 system and games like Shadowrun and everything that, latched onto this, 6 attribute, skill-based, roll a D20, very straightforward system. That all got started with...
Was Pathfinder back then as well, or was
not yet in our story, but it does take a lot from that as well, and you'll see why. So that's 2000. Come 2003, 2004, the game becomes a little more codified. It's different from 2nd edition, 3rd edition, enough so that it goes through some growing pains. And Wizards of the Coast comes out with what is called Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, and this is where you see so much content being released for the D20 system thanks to the OGL. So all these publishers, Paizo in particular, and this is a name that we'll come back to because they become important, also creating content. These are the guys who end up ultimately creating the Pathfinder game, which is why I mentioned them now. But before this point, they're creating supplementary material for 3.5 edition. And all these other companies doing it as well. It's fantastic. And this goes on until about 2007. And in 2007 is when we see the release of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. And Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition is fantastic, but it's very different. And it does not play at all like 3rd edition or 3.5 edition. And at the time of its release, Wizards of the Coast decides, all right, we are not going to use the open gaming license anymore. We are going to use something else. They call it like the game system license is what they changed the name to, and it is far more restrictive than the open gaming license. And what we ultimately see from that is a lot more Wizards of the Coast produced content as compared to third-party produced content.
Yeah, that would explain why I always hear people talk about 4, but I never see anything about 4 online.
Mm-hmm. No, so compared to, well, here's the thing. So if you look at all of the content that's ever been released for 4th edition, which had a lifespan of 7-ish years from 2007 to 2014, you see so much stuff. You see... I'm looking at some of the... Here's a good example. In the 7 years that 4th edition was out there, we see over 3,000 officially released feats, 77 officially released classes, 116 officially released themes, which are comparable to like backgrounds, and well, even 808 officially released backgrounds, even if you want to look at that. Thousands of monsters, items, armor pieces, weapons, like so much content, all coming from officially released Wizards of the Coast 4th edition content. And then you do get a smattering of third-party release stuff, but it was not as popular a system, so you don't see as much of it. Compare that to the amount of 5th edition officially released content. 5th edition has been out for almost 10 years at this point. I think they have, let's look at character customization, for example, just under 250 feats compared to the thousands in 4th edition. They've released one additional class in the form of the Artificer over the entire lifespan of the game. They do focus on subclasses if you really wanted to consider those. But at the same time, it's just that they've really stopped releasing, I guess, like first-party content, and they've really relied on third-party content to fill that void. You see a lot of people making third-party content for 5th edition, and so you got to look, I guess, outside of the official rule books and source books in order to get your fix for, if you want to spice up your game, that sort of thing. And that's what I've always, I guess, I sort of see that as where we might see D&D 1, this or 1 D&D rather, this code name for the new iteration of Dungeons and Dragons going. If they're going to be restrictive about their content again, then you're probably going to see a big drop in the amount of third-party support and third-party content that's being created. But at the same time, I don't know if Wizards of the Coast actually has it within themselves to start producing first-party content anymore, because they've really fallen off that over the years, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Well, an interesting thing with you bringing up 4th edition, 4th edition is, in a way, though I didn't play it nearly as much. I think I ran one session for my family, and then we realized that in that kind of a game, we don't play that well together. But in 4th edition, they also had some web tools available.
Ooh,
you had
talk about those web
dice
tools.
rollers online. You had character builders. You could have a subscription where you could get access to all their content, and you could use their character builder. I spent an insane amount of time in there just building characters and coming up with, backstories and things for these characters that I would, in the end, never do anything with. Mm-hmm, they kind of spawned a lot of my early creative stuff. But now, as we're jumping into kind of the run-up for 1 D&D with D&D Beyond and everything, I'm seeing the similarities to how they were doing things with 4th edition, and with how you're kind of bringing up the way that they ran the GSL
gaming system license. Yeah, that's right.
The similarly more restrictive OGL 1.1 or 2.0 or whatever they would end up calling it. There's some curious overlap there.
Well, yeah, you make an excellent point. They were really ahead of the curve back in 4th edition days in terms of they had the D&D Insider program, I believe it was called, the DDI, which hosted a whole suite of online tools, character builders, monster builders. They had ways that you could import your own custom feats, skills, powers, that sort of thing. Really slick stuff. And they also had a pretty readily available offline character builder as well. So yeah, that was the one that I got started with most and definitely spent the most time with. I did the exact same sort of thing, though. Spent a lot of time making different ideal fantasy characters, that sort of thing. It was probably the only time I actually spent money on on like an online subscription service, because if you really wanted to get the most out of it, you'd be doing that. But the best thing about it, though, and you make an excellent point here, that online character builder would get updated like on a weekly basis. This is at the time when both Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine were both still being published electronically, at least. And so every month you'd be getting new content for the game, and that would all get fed directly into the character builder and world builders, monster builders, all that stuff. So you always had up-to-date information. It was like, it's honestly the one thing I think we've suffered from most was losing access to that, because they did ultimately take it offline shortly after 5th edition launched. And now you sort of have to dig around in order to find all of that old 4th edition content, but it's real good stuff. I still stand by it. It's I still run a game in 4th edition to this day, though I should say that we don't necessarily play by the official rules. We've sort of tweaked it, homebrewed it, as it were, just to make it our own, the kind of way that we like to play that sort of thing. Which I think, and I hope, is going to be a more common, I guess, sort of way of engaging with RPGs if the sort of public backlash against 1D&D continues. Because I think it's a good thing when game runners are able to take the stuff they like from a system, maybe pull in a few things that they like from another system, put it all together, make sure their players understand how things are going to go, how things are going to run, but, just sort of build the system that works best for you and your players.
That already exists, Vector. It's called homebrewing.
Well, and I said that term by name, indeed. But I hope that that's something that's going to become, I guess, more common.
I think the gatekeeping with homebrewing is that it does take effort to formulate, I suppose. To
learn, to
organize.
Make sure everybody's on the same page, make sure everybody understands. Yes. So it's not something that always works for, say, I pick up and play online Roll20 game or something like that, perhaps. But, for your home games, I'd love for people to get upset enough with Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons to start, scrapping and patching their own systems together.
Oh,
I think that would be great.
I think this has blown out of proportion to the point where that's inevitable at this point. I mean, large community figures of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPG are making moves and making it known that, hey, we're working on something new, or we're speeding up our timelines, or we basically showing that, hey, this is not acceptable, and this is like a huge betrayal of just like understanding your own customers. I mean, it blows my mind. I don't know if there's been an updated announcement, but the fact that they're even trying to enforce the banning of homebrewing unless you're a paying user is so wildly stupid to me. And
so let's explain that. So within this week, we've seen another leaked document purporting to show plans for the future of what is the service called? It's Dungeons and Dragons Beyond. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I believe D&D Beyond, I believe, is where this is coming from, right? Because they're trying to monetize it. As you know a little bit more, I believe, about it.
Whatever the name of their current online client is, the idea is that they are going to be releasing this or developing this virtual tabletop, and that it's going to offer all these features, but it's going to require a subscription, a heavy subscription, if these leaks are to be believed, upwards of $30 a month, with a freemium tier, as it were. You know how these things go. But but heavily restricting the kind of stuff you can do at a base level. Not unheard of these days, but never something that you like to see. Another thing that has been mentioned in these purported leaks, and something that I hope we'll circle back to in a minute, though I'd like to make another point on the history of this OGL if we can get to that, is this notion of artificial AI dungeon masters. And now the two of you were doing some more AI stuff earlier in this week, as a matter of fact. Got to catch a little bit of that stream. Lovely stuff as always. But I'd love to question Az about what he thinks about AI DMs and the potential therein and how goofy a concept it is. But first, I wanted to, because you just reminded me, Dregn, when you were talking about these companies, banding together, coming up with independent game licenses, coming up with independent systems. So you had mentioned Pathfinder earlier in our discussion. So after the release of 4th edition, as we were talking about, that is where the Pathfinder split happened. So because, and this is relevant to what we're seeing today as well, because so many players were invested in this 3rd edition and 3.5 edition, because there was so much existing content for it, all these third-party publishers making content for it, there was a great mass of players who decided, you know what, we are fine with this game, we like this game, we don't need to change stuff up. 4th edition, it's not for us, we'll just keep doing this. And the sort of most extreme reaction to that was the company Paizo deciding that they were going to release their own independent game system, which shared much more in common with the then defunct 3.5 edition than it did with the new 4th edition. So they split off and they just sort of kept doing their own thing. And now we're seeing the same sort of thing happen when 5th edition is saying, all right, you know what, we're making changes, all the old stuff, there's going to be a new license. Now they're claiming that anything in 1D&D it's supposed to be this like edition neutral, like backwards compatible diddly-do. Now we heard that same sort of statement during the run-up to 5th edition, back when they were calling it D&D Next, that, oh, you'll be able to use it in your 4th edition stuff, in your 3rd edition stuff, in your 2nd edition stuff, ended up ultimately becoming its own thing. So when they talk about 1D&D, I still in the back of my head are thinking, all right, it's not unlikely that this will ultimately just end up becoming what we call 6th edition. But we will see going forward. But yeah, this idea that we're seeing independent game licenses spreading off and independent game systems spreading off, very reminiscent of the change between 3rd to 4th edition. And I wonder, is Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons just going to get caught into this cycle, this repeating cycle of making big changes and sort of trying to claw back too much influence from third-party publishers, and ultimately, you know, wrecking their reputation for another 7-10 years, that sort of thing?
I think the perspective of it shifts obviously with each iteration, right? So as Wizards of the Coast is like, oh, we want to try something new, and it upsets a good portion of their existing community. Paizo is an interesting company because I don't have a whole lot of history with Paizo, but I have seen that there is a very, I guess, loyal fan base behind Paizo and Pathfinder, right? And the fact that Paizo is just like, hey, you know, 3.5, you got a ton of people who are super happy with this. And the fact that Wizards is like just going to leave it behind and move on, right? Is Paizo came in, it's like, I'm going to save you, is the view I have in my head. And the fact that, you know, with the wild success of 5th edition, which I think is part in due to the flexibility of the system and the kind of open interpretation that you can have with that system.
There is, I will say, there is no inherent ease of, you know, content creation within 5th edition that is not there in 4th edition or 3rd edition. It's just been made very easy to publish content for, which is why we see more published content for it as compared to 4th edition. And 3rd edition is just old. It's just out of the way.
True. But it also, I don't know, there's something accessible about 5th edition. And maybe that's just the changing of the times made it accessible. Maybe it's the internet made it accessible. That
certainly plays a role. Yeah. I think it's just that it's the newest edition. I think here's the thing. So by Wizards of the Coast's own reporting, every edition of Dungeons and Dragons has always been the best-selling edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So players are always increasing, books are always being sold. It's not necessarily a statement on the quality of the edition or anything like that. It's just people gravitate toward the newest. They want to stay up to date. In fact, I've experienced that firsthand, actually. So when 5th edition came out, my friends and I, we were running 2 4th edition campaigns at the time. Now, 5th edition comes out, it's got barely any character creation rules or anything to go along with it. It's very bare bones. It's just that first, Dungeon Master's Guide and Player's Handbook and what have you.
Yep.
I'm running my 4th edition game. My friend is running his 4th edition game. He decides, all right, we're going to upgrade to 5th edition. Everybody transfer your characters over, even though, some of the classes aren't necessarily there. We'll just sort of, try to fill in the gaps, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That game doesn't get played anymore. My 4th edition one still does, still using the 4th edition rules. It's just sometimes you don't have to keep up to date with the newest thing, but some people are incented. They just got this urge that, all right, it's the newest thing, it's the most official thing. They buy all the books. These are what you'd call fans, I guess, or something like that, if you could tolerate such a term. But that's where you see, like, when the 3.5 people said, all right, we're fine with ours, we're not going to go to 4th edition. When people like me said, all right, I'm fine with 4th edition, I'll leave 5th edition and see how it plays out, and maybe we'll jump on that in the future. I would really like for people, now that there's, this sort of public animosity towards Wizards of the Coast, not that I'm against Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that, but consider, are you good with what you've got right now? You can just keep playing 5th edition. You don't have to worry about, they're making a new license and this and that. Or are you still happy with Pathfinder 1 or Pathfinder 2 or 3.5 edition or something like that?
I think the big argument here is that, yeah, you could do that in the private setting, but I think the issue I have with a lot of these live services, right, or these live models or these updated models. Which,
I'll give you that, yes, is that it's going to be harder and harder to find your preferred system or whatever in an online context or something like that.
And also, one of the big reasons I would argue that 5th edition was wildly more successful than previous iterations is also because, again, we had a big show like Critical Role that began.
That was a big show, that's true.
It brought awareness to Dungeons and Dragons and insight into what Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because people, hear it, and if you don't have first-hand experience or you haven't seen someone playing it, you have a certain idea of just the nerdiest basement dwellers.
Yeah,
right?
People tend to have like a cultural conception of Dungeons and Dragons, but at the same time, that can form without ever, seeing any actual play.
Correct. And I think culture does play a big role. I think the internet does play a big role in, in augmenting kind of culture in a sense, but the ability for, say, these shows and the content creators who leverage the system, my understanding is the new OGL update is going to effectively override the previous agreement, right?
Which they would like for that to happen, yeah.
They would love for that to happen, right? Because then it gives them a bit more control. But on the flip side, I always see, I compare a lot to like the game industry and the community and the culture around gaming, but like dead games have a resurgent or breathe, people breathe new life into games that people have forgotten about through, say, modding, or a game that probably shouldn't have lasted as long lasts a decade, Skyrim, because of modders.
I was going to say, right? TF2 is still kicking.
Yeah, the fact that people can make bots that basically run the game is wild to me. But yeah, the ability for the community to take a framework and just let it blossom is such a very inspiring and beautiful thing to see. The fact that a business tries to rein it in makes me sad.
It needs to be championed.
Yeah.
We don't need the official stuff at this point. I've been thinking about that recently. Is that we've got 10 years of D&D 5th edition content, not to mention all third-party stuff. 7 years of 4th edition content, another 7 years of 3rd edition content, decades of 2nd and 1st edition content, if you wanted to drag all that stuff up as well. Like, what's new? What new ground are they actually breaking these days? And when they do come up with
get...
something that's fun, like, for example, when I was running my 4th edition stuff,
yeah,
5th edition comes out, and it's got this concept of advantage and disadvantage. You roll the 2 dice, you keep the higher or the lower, depending on if it's an advantaged roll or a disadvantaged roll. It's very slick, it's very quick, it's more interactive than, say, what 4th edition was, where they relied on a lot of static bonuses, +2s, -2s, +5, -5, that sort of thing. And technically, yes, you could achieve the same statistical averages of rolling 2 dice by just plus or minusing a 5. That tends to be the usual variance that you get out of it, but it's not as fun sometimes. And sometimes it's just a good idea to go with what's fun. Like, that's good game building right there. So cool. I was a big fan of that introduction in 5th edition, and so I adopted that into my 4th edition games just because it's slick. And that should be the thing, is that, all right, where can we go from here?
I got a good segue for this. So right next to me, right, we got our currently current professional GM who
the
runs
professor,
games.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hell, if anyone on this table here is going to get affected by it and has to think about that, it's going to be you, dude. So, yeah, what are you looking at? Are you gonna change how you run your games? Are you gonna jump to a new system? What do you been thinking?
Well, first of all, yeah. Do you feel as though there's enough public backlash against this decision making that it will affect people's desire to play 5th edition or 6th edition or 1D&D content going into the future?
I mean, you can already see that. Like, at least while it's going on and it's in people, at the forefront of people's minds, you see so many more people who are like, hey, I'm jumping over the Pathfinder. What do I need? What do I need to get started with Pathfinder? I'm looking to try some other games. What are the good ones to look at and stuff like that? If you looked at the LFG subreddit on Reddit, it was 99% D&D 5e, and now you're starting to see a lot more Pathfinder and a lot more other games that are even very different from Pathfinder and D&D, less combat focused and stuff. People are starting already to branch out to other systems. Whether that'll stick in the long term, who's to say?
That is interesting in telling us that a lot of people probably have never even considered other gaming systems, and
exactly,
it's cool at least that people are looking to try. That is nice to see.
Yeah. And I'm sure once like MCDM, Kobold Press down the line put out whatever systems they're working on, I'm sure there'll be a surge of people looking to try those, because those are pretty big names within the third party D&D community. So I'm sure they'll get some decent ground right out the gate.
It's also important for a lot of these big companies to understand that making a system, although now I would argue is the opportunity to do it, it's an injustice to do it if you can't get awareness around it, which I think this is where I'm going to bring Critical Role back into this, because if I recall, they even had maybe said that they might be looking at starting their own system, which was interesting because of the fan base and attention that they have now through 5th edition. I feel like Paizo might have some competition when it comes to whatever they might try to cook up. So it's interesting, and I agree with Spaceman that the fact that people are now exploring what else they could leverage is, I think, already a great start on its own.
Now here's the thing though. Something like Pathfinder was given the opportunity to succeed because 3rd edition D&D was supplanted by 4th edition, which was distinct enough that these were effectively two different games, very different games. Is a new game, or many new games, created by these competing companies to... Here's the thing, though. What are they going to look like? Because one D&D may not look all that different from 5th edition D&D, and I'd argue that it's probably in its best interest not to look much different from 5th edition D&D. You can't exactly just remake the same sort of game under a different company label. Like when you've got the established thing going, like it's a little different in this situation. The idea that these games and these licensing systems are going to sprout up is in response to a change in a third-party licensing agreement. It's not in response to a change in gameplay at all. So I'd really be interested in knowing what any of these proposed games would look like before we get too excited about them. Because if they're just going to be the same thing, then I'd argue that they're probably not going to last. I saw a...
most of them won't.
Yeah, they definitely won't. But here's the idea. It's like somebody comes along, a mathematician or a statistician or something like that, comes along and they say, man, there's like 10 different competing standards just for this one reading sort of thing. You know what? Somebody should really try to unify them into one sort of, all-encompassing standard. And what happens? Well, now you have 11 competing standards for whatever it is that they're looking at. And that could be the exact same thing that we're going to see with all these new games, quote unquote, new systems popping up, is that we're not exactly fixing anything, are we? We're just getting a lot of the same,
I think,
5th edition derivatives.
Kind of going off of what you were talking about when you mentioned Advantage and how you brought that into your 4th edition game, I think one of the potential best things to come out of so many different people looking to make their own systems is you have the value of there's all these different ideas going into these separate things that then players of any of these given games can see these and be like, oh, I'm not super down with this whole thing, but these parts, I really like these parts. And then this guy over here, he has these things that I like. And then you can start to kind of Frankenstein your own little masterpiece.
Tailor-made.
Not even
out of what ideas come up, since now it's not just like two big names out there that are putting out ideas. Now you've got, 10, 11 different significant systems to pull from.
I would love to see that. I would love to see a world in which every, DM, GM, storyteller, if you will, has their own sort of, their system, their tailor-made system, picked apart from different systems, put together piecemeal, homebrewed, if you will, as we were mentioning earlier, and sort of what you're getting at here, taking the best from all these different sources. Obviously, a nightmare to try and coordinate in any sort of online context or anything like that, but that would be the dream. That's the kind of thing that I'd like to see. Yeah.
Which, interestingly enough, I feel like a lot of these hobbyists should look at comparative verticals, and I say verticals, that's a very businessy term, but basically, from tabletops to video games to even probably like film and novels, right? You can probably see various trends, and we see this particularly with games where we're seeing right now a interesting rise in indie development and support for indie development, because people are starting to get tired of the publication BS that happens with game development, right? I feel there's a good chance in a kind of a smaller sample that we're going to see this happening with tabletop RPG, where this new wave that will likely come out of this fiasco, if it is capitalized on. If it's not, it'll probably die off in the next couple of years. But if it is capitalized on, we're going to see a resurgence, much like we see gaming going through various cycles of popularity, right? There was an MMO phase, there was an FPS phase. I think we might be heading into this kind of modular phase when it comes to tabletop RPG, or at least that would be my hope, is to see a modular system.
Yeah, or everybody will start playing World of Darkness again. That'd be fun.
Right, but also something easily, expandable, easily approachable, right? There could be a base model that is, good for new players. There could be a core model that is good for your standard folks. And then there could be like modules that can add new features, classes under some sort of a building framework. But it's going to depend right on the creativity of people who get involved. Hell, even just for my Sunday campaign, I'm so tempted to just try to explore a minimalist style, because I personally love minimalist board games where it's like there's depth in the game but the components are minimal, right?
The rules fit on a flashcard. Yeah.
Right. And it's really just your imagination and how you approach the game that is where the enjoyment of it comes from, which for me, that has been what I appreciated from D&D. It's the human element and the getting into character and letting your imagination go into places. And I hope I do a good job at that in my game. But yeah, I've even entertained the idea of like, okay, if we took what people know and with dice and a piece of paper or a mobile app or a website or an idea for a character, how can we just take like, hey, go to a player. What kind of player do you want to play as? Like, what's a fun character that you can spin up in your brain, and what kind of cool shit can they do? Okay, well, how do we then just immediately translate that with bare minimum rules into a game that you'll enjoy? And then how would we resolve combat? I feel like there's a very easy mechanic that could be introduced to that, and maybe I'll explore it. But yeah, the community as a whole, I think, is in a position where we're going to see a bit of a churn happen. A lot of people are going to try new things. A lot of them, the vast majority of them are going to fail. And a handful are going to, be new competitors in the sphere. And that'll be very exciting to see.
It's interesting that you use the term modularity when you were talking about that. I seem to recall that's exactly the sort of language that was sold to us via D&D Next in the lead up to 5th edition. So it's an idea that they've had themselves for a while, but just never really fully capitalized on, unfortunately.
I'll tell you why. It's because they're still a business and they're trying to control it too much rather than let the community just go wild with it, right? That's a problem I've noticed in business and corporations, is that there's this weird, actually in life in general, right? Because traditionally there had to be some sort of a structure, a hierarchy. And having dove into this internet sphere of, streaming and community online, there's a bit of chaos when it comes to the internet, right? I think inherently just the individual voice out in the cosmos of the internet is a very fascinating ecosystem for me. And I think trying to control that is a mistake, much like trying to control people. It's just, things are gonna start twisting and turning and breaking and retaliating when you do that. And I think this is I don't know if it'll happen in my generation or if it'll come after I'm long gone, but I do think there will come a time where individual entities, people or not, are going to orbit one another, and through the chaos will be a sense of structure. But that's very philosophical. We're not there yet. So
profound, when it comes so wise.
When it comes to like the whole internet community, right? I do find that the ability for people to share and witness and put themselves out there is a very fascinating ecosystem, and I'm very excited to see the ideas that people come up with, because regardless of whether they succeed or fail, the ideas that people are exploring right now are going to spark more ideas, right? And with the nature of the internet, it's gonna blow up exponentially. And this is something that's a bit short-sighted in the way that humans think, is that you spend enough time doing the same thing over and over, or specializing in something, there will be a point of, I guess I'm going to use a cheeky term that is themed after
be cheeky.
You'll have like an event horizon, right? There will be a critical mass point. There will be a point where it grows exponentially, and this is shown statistically over and over and again with like YouTube channels, right? You stream consistently for 2 to 4 years. Somewhere in there, if you put your effort in, there will come a point where it just suddenly explodes and becomes exponential, right? There's a certain point of critical mass where there's enough attention, where it gets out there, and then it just has a chain reaction. So it's again, you could dive into that thought as much as I think too much, but I do think, right, that's kind of where the success of D&D came from, in the explosion. Yeah, of course, year over year it's going to grow, because you do the same thing long enough and you do it decent enough, it's eventually going to gather attention. You're eventually going to you're eventually going to, I suppose, well, within the communities that support it, right, champions will rise up. And in this case, I'll again use Critical Role because that was a very large influence for me. And you know, D&D as a hobby has exploded, which with the explosion of D&D, tabletop RPGs as a hobby has exploded. And again, it lends that chain reaction. So getting a little philosophical, but we'll leave it there.
A little philosophical. Circling back to the concept of modularity, though, here's a question for you, since you've got more firsthand anecdotal data, at least, working in the pay-to-play sphere, I guess, as it were. How much D&D do you include in your D&D games, if you get my drift? Like, if you were to create a pie chart that is composed of official D&D source content, homebrew content that you've made up yourself, and third-party supplemental content, what does that graph look like?
Well, for a time, I was running for a group that was very combat focused in their gameplay. They wanted the Diablo experience. They go into the dungeon, they fight the monsters, they keep going deeper. And so, I mean, in a way, that was kind of a very easy one to run, because it's just like I take the monsters from D&D Beyond, I drop them in, you know, and we just go. But the typical kind of game I run is definitely a lot more character focused, a lot more focused on the players, and so there's less dropping in the monsters from the monster manual. There's less beyond the core elements of the gameplay, rolling for skills and things like that. It's definitely a lot more focused on you know, hours of nerdy people talking to each other. But more recently, even before all this started kind of going the way it's going, I started, there was a shift in my one of my ongoing campaigns to start using a third-party, I guess you consider it a third-party system, largely based on the SRD and the OGL and stuff like that, called Level Up Advanced 5th Edition. And we're just getting to a point where we're going to start experimenting with that in that group. And I'm starting another campaign that is using that same thing, because it takes the elements of 5th edition that I like, and then it adds some stuff that 5th edition didn't really expand on as much as I would have liked. So there's definitely a lot more involvement of third-party content, and occasionally dropping in some homebrew. I go fairly light on homebrew, exactly. I make a lot of use out of third-party content, though, because I think there's so many people who have a really great understanding of these game mechanics and how they can be used in really good and interesting ways. So I like to kind of tap those resources more than trying to figure out that stuff for myself, because I don't think so good, that hard to do. But yeah, lots of third party at this point. It's mostly third party at this point.
Well, that's the crux of it, isn't it? And perhaps that's what the folks at Wizards aren't getting, is that how essential that third party content is to most people's gaming experience, or the homebrew stuff. Like, I think that I've never used an enemy from a monster manual in any game that I've ever run. Like, I've just never been one to look at official stats or anything like that. Like, sometimes I'll be throwing let's give an example. Like, in 5th edition, I didn't even know this until I was informed. Something like a troll or a goblin or something like that inherently is supposed to have like a weakness to fire or something like that. Whatever the case may be, there's some creature that, you know, has certain, you know, stat blocks or weaknesses, affinities, that sort of thing, and it's just known. And so if I throw one of those at my party or something like that, and it doesn't match up to what a player has read in a monster manual or something like that, sometimes they'll be quite shocked because they don't understand how it could possibly be different than what they had read in a book somewhere.
Yeah, that's a bit of unconscious metagaming, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. But yeah, it's such a creative hobby. The fact that they're trying to stifle the creativity,
some people,
third party
right?
supporting creativity, it's wild to me. It's like, how do you not understand that the creativity is what makes the game? Trying to reel that in is not gonna help in the long term.
Creativity
but going to like
maketh the game.
Yeah, but also with like monsters, right? There's that problem of as a person running the game, if you do everything by the book, well, that basically tells, or not really tells, but your players, or if another GM becomes a player in a game that you're running, what does that mean? Like every monster that you put out, it's like, oh, I actually know this one. I've encountered it in another alternate dimension life in a campaign far beyond, yonder. And it's like, yeah, fire resistant. It's like, yeah, a troll with fire resistance, or not fire resistance,
or
fire
whatever,
weakness.
whatever. Yeah.
I already know about that, but if you come in, it's like, hey, this is a fire troll. It's like, what the hell is a fire troll?
And so ultimately, it becomes, well, so what good is some virtual tabletop environment or D&D Beyond subscription or whatever if I can't use all the stuff that I would normally use in a game? Like there's almost zero utility in that base version that they've been leaked about, where you get no access to third-party support, no access to your own custom stuff. And we'll talk about one of the other features when we come back from break, you guys. We're going to go for about 30 seconds here, and then we are going to be back with Dregn and as we continue our discussion of all things Dungeons and or Dragons. We'll be right back, you guys. And we're back with Dregn and Az here in studio on the Vector Spaceman show, because we're doing our radio voice, Dregn.
Oh boy.
Second hour of the Vector Spaceman show, we've got Azabiel and Dragon Durant in studio discussing all things RPG, role-playing games, and specifically latest developments in the world of the flagship iconic RPG experience, Dungeons and Dragons. We were discussing before the break some of these leaked features purported to be bundled into this subscription service that Wizards of the Coast and or parent company Hasbro is trying to push onto customers, and customers might be the most apt term to use here for how it seems that they view the Dungeons and Dragons playing player base. But one thing I wanted to touch on, one of these features, this concept of an AI DM. Now, Dregn, you're quite interested in AI, as you're quite interested in DMs. Do you think this sort of concept has any legs to speak of? Because to me, it seems like something that is just never going to work conceptually from the ground up. I don't know how anyone could have had the idea that it would be a good idea, how they could have had the idea that it would function the way that they want it to. It's as if they've never seen all of the disastrous results that we've gotten out of chatbots over the years. Which could only be what this thing is going to end up being, a chatbot with heavily weighted responses based on, I guess, one presumes, adventure modules or something like that. It's going to become like an old, like, go west or grab ye flask sort of thing. Like, very basic, like, how else could they possibly get something like this to run?
It feels, again, like a drastic misunderstanding of what they have. And what their market is. But I mean, it's not something I'm terribly worried about in my professional life. It feels like it's something that, at best, at least currently, at best could be used in the form of something that's very heavily scripted out, potentially, and even that feels iffy. Or something that is just a blatant dungeon crawl, where it doesn't have to think about story and how things relate to other things. It's just you do a little bit of traversal, and then you fight some things, and then you do some more traversal, and you fight some more things.
It's telling you what's in the room and how many hit points they have. Yeah, exactly.
So I can tell you a lot about this topic because for the past, gosh, I forget when Dungeon AI was a deal, but I have played with these story-driven and or adventure-driven AI tools in the past before a widely accessible open chat engine was released, quote-unquote ChatGPT. But first of all, a machine-driven campaign that is going to be potentially part of this quote-unquote virtual tabletop that we don't even know, like, is it going to be like Roll20? Is it going to be some three-dimensional, virtual dungeon, which might be cool, but we'll see. But that's called a video game.
Right? It's very gamey, yes, is what it seems. Now, I think we have seen some conceptual images of their virtual tabletop environment that they'd like to release, and it seems like a mix between like a tabletop simulator with it almost looked like little Hero Forge miniatures in terms of the fidelity of these things. And if I was a betting man, if I was a betting spaceman, I bet you that they're going to try to monetize the heck out of little virtual miniatures.
Oh boy, they are. Which is another reason why the initial $30 price tag is just absolutely ridiculous, right? Like, if they really wanted to monetize, and this is a bit of a distraction, but they can go in so many directions from,
Don't you give them any ideas, Dragon. Don't you start telling them that they should go for a free model and they should start charging everybody $5 for wizard hats. Or like that.
If you're a business
already out there
one
with
of these,
dice.
Man, hire me, please, somebody. I will help in the good way. but going back to AI,
I want to put on my robe and wizard hat, but it costs $14.99.
Ooh. Well, actually, in today's world, Vector, that cosmetic would actually be $20 or more.
Well, no, I would have to buy dragon gems, and then I would only be able to buy them in increments that were just outside the range of what I was going for. So I'd have to buy a little more, and then I'd have some left over, and then I'd be incentivized to buy more so that I could buy something else that I want to get. And maybe sometimes it'll go on sale, and then I'll be more incentivized to do it.
But hey, it's an 800% value, so you know what? You can't really complain.
How can you argue with an 800% value?
But back to AI. So AI DMing is possible, but AI text tools don't have the memory capacity and intelligence that we can process memory to create a coherent long-term campaign. And it is also prone in looping logic when it comes to anything story driven. So what you could do with AI dungeons would be to create like a simple scenario, right? Like, hey, this is your objective that's defined in memory. You tell us a little bit about your character, which could be defined in, which will be added to memory when it comes to the AI. And then you might have your like objective and certain keywords when it comes to, hey, here are the faction names that we're going to pull from. So you can go into a pretty advanced depth and create the foundational data the AI will call for a scenario. But if you start expanding that scope from the scenario to an entire world building situation, there's a fair chance that it will get confused, because what happens is when you type in, say, hey, I want to go to this location, or tell me about this location might be a better term, the quote unquote location is going to be a token, a keyword that will be recognized by the AI. It's going to go into its memory logic and be like, okay, this location, what does this location mean? And depending on depending on how advanced the AI that they're using as the base is, that may also trigger additional additional tokens to go out and to say, okay, this location is part of the X empire, it is run by Y king, the environment is in Z situation, and the AI response is going to try to take all that data and consolidate down to answer something procedural for whatever was typed in, right? The problem with that is that if you do that for, say, 200 to 300 prompts, you'll get something pretty coherent, right? And you can create some sort of a process, or not a process, a journey that will, I think, entertain somebody for a good while. But when you start pushing into the 2,000 to 3,000 plus number of prompts, the issue that I have is that the AI is incapable of organizing what has occurred leading to that point, right?
Now that is shockingly interesting, Dregn, because I never even thought of that perspective. I was always thinking they're not going to know what to do, if a character tries to matrix flip kick off a wall and, jab somebody in the side of the head or whatever. They wouldn't be able to conceptualize of, sick tricks. But no, that's absolutely right, is that I don't know if they could keep track of detail, of minutia, of an ongoing campaign. So is this only going to be limited to, like a dungeon crawl, a one-off, something self-contained? I wonder about that. It'd
probably be a short deal. Based on my dabbling of these AI text tools, like even in ChatGPT, right, which you can sign up and play with today, you can convert or set the premise for the AI of that session and say, hey, I want to go on an adventure, like a tabletop RPG adventure, and you can give it some information like, this is my character, this is my backstory. But the information that the AI might pull based on ChatGPT's model, for example, is it's going to pull from its data set. So unless you specify a bunch of detail about the world and the immediate location, you might get like, okay, your character, John the Barbarian, is a member of a large tech firm in Silicon Valley. Like, it might just prompt you with real world locations, and it breaks the immersion, right? Whereas other AI models, such as Dungeon AI, which is specifically made to be like a text adventure, they've put so many restrictions that their AI, I would argue, is pretty effed up. But the way the AI processes data, the way the AI remembers data, is very specific to the models being used and the tools around these models. So, as much as the AI, I think the AI is intelligent enough to where if you were to say, hey, I want to do some like bullet time matrix stuff, it can actually understand that because it has the data set that says bullet time, I know what that is, matrix, I know what that is, and it will provide you probably, I would argue, probably good 7 to 9 out of 10 times you'll get a reasonable response. My problem with these models is that it's not advanced enough without some serious like supercomputing and memory, which is going to take a ton of data. And I don't think, with the exception of like large AI or tech for businesses, I don't think like Wizard of the Coast is even understanding how AI works to even promote an idea of an AI DM right now. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with it. But I think it'd be a fun little one-off thing. My guess is they pitched it to their board members and it was like, hey, try this out. And if they did try it out, which board members don't give a shit to try anything out in that case, but they probably had some people sample it and try it. But I'd be hard pressed to believe that they had done long-term testing, if they had tested at all, to see the viability of it based on just my own play.
Definitely worth $30 a month, though, right?
Stop it.
The biggest flaw with AI DMing, right, is that the AI is definitely not going to have the very human sense of the best time to roll some dice behind the screen and just say, no, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Or just understanding of intent. Like what you put on, what you type could be wildly different from the intent based on how you would explain what you're trying to do, right? Yeah, I think this is also a limitation just with text-based role-playing. Because there is a subset of the tabletop RPG community which they just don't talk. They just do text-based adventures, which
Yeah, that's
maybe
true.
some of
That's
our
true.
mutual friends have done some text-based role-playing, right? There's some extra nuance in how you engage in that, such as maybe some people will describe in a footnote of what they're what their intention is, or maybe their word choice has to be modified to make that work. It's an issue that I have when it comes to running online games, and Azure maybe understands this a bit better. I'm not sure how you do it in your games, but the ability to have body language, for example, is massive. It's one of the reasons why I'm always tempted to go back to my hobby shop and join IRL games again rather than doing the online stuff, because the body language and the ability to, even just from the GM's perspective, to see visually where his attention is so important in these games. It helps so tremendously. And you look at large successful organizations who have done, or not even orgs, but groups that have done tabletop RPGs online. The vast majority of them are in person for a reason, right? Because there's a dynamic there that you lose out on.
It's a live
when you
show,
start
yeah.
virtualizing it. Yeah, so yeah, I'm very interested to see how it changes, but I'm also a bit skeptical just because in the gaming sphere, we see how MMOs have evolved, right? The massively multiplayer RPGs, where people will play a massively multiplayer game solo.
They've sort of
And the
gravitated
player-
towards single player content, you're
Yeah.
right. Or at least single
And they're-
player completionism.
Correct. And they're also kind of starting, the games themselves are now designed in a way where it's like the single player experience is probably more important than the original intention behind the creation of a massively multiplayer world, which is, for me, sad because my exposure to MMOs was in a very social environment, and my experience with MMOs was a very social experience.
The old school. Yeah.
Yeah. So the old idea of like a sandbox and it's a community driven, set of events can occur. I think we're kind of seeing a bit of a potential resurgence of that, but that's besides the point. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it all evolves in the coming next year, 2 years.
An AI DM can't get excited about what its players are doing. It can't, like you said before, it can't come up with a perfect opportunity to roll for something interesting.
Yeah.
Or something
Not even that.
related to, something that you did a session or two ago. It's not going to be
Correct.
able to recall that sort of thing. That's interesting. That's definitely going to be a limitation. And that makes me think that you could be right, that it's going to be more like a dungeon crawl, that it's going to be more like a choose your own adventure novel with a coat of paint over it.
There's also my big issue with AI and these AI text tools is that due to the type of responses it can generate and the type of directions people can go in on the extremities when it comes to things that are questionable in terms of legality, the content of it is questionable. There are restrictions that these parent organizations behind these tools will add. And every time I've seen it happen, yes, it does do a decent job to control the certain type of input and output that can exist, but it also destroys the kind of creativity of the AI, because blacklisting certain topics and keywords doesn't just include the extremities you're trying to avoid. It also removes all of the potential influence in the greater part of the bell curve that it can exist, right? So it really restricts and changes the AI's behavior, which I've noticed in every single AI text generator that I've ever played with, where there's a period where it's just Wild West, and it goes into just crazy directions. You're like, holy crap, where did what? And then you'll get a period where there's a few, it's learned a little bit, it understands a little bit when it comes to how to generate, how to receive input, how to generate output, not to mention the community will probably figure out a degree of how to use the tool now that it's been out for a year or whatnot. And then there will come a point where it's gained enough attention where there are now people who are like, hey, it's doing that bad thing again. You got to stop it. It's like, well, yeah. And so they put, those little bowling buffer lanes in, and it just can't, it just changes the AI and the behavior of it, and it loses its charm.
Bowling with the bumpers on.
Yeah. So
keeping you out of the gutter.
I didn't think of it as that kind of a metaphor, but that's a way to look at it. Yeah.
Here's a question for you, Dregn.
What's up?
You just got me thinking about that, about chat AI and what have you. You certainly interact with that more than any of us. Do you run into issues with proper sentence structure, grammar, punctuation, that sort of thing? How heavily does that tend to affect like something like a ChatGPT response or something?
ChatGPT is interesting because it's really come a long way. It's actually surprising to me that not if you're on the internet and you haven't even tried playing with it, you should. Just not whether you agree with it or not, or whether you feel like you're being used to train it or not. AI is in the business sphere already. It's been in the tech sphere for years. And now it's I don't know, I feel like within the next 4 years minimum, and that's probably being generous, it's going to evolve to a point where both creatives and non-creatives can really take AI in just wildly imaginable directions and create some very interesting things. Like you can create D&D monsters using ChatGPT. You can create anything from a bullet list of things that you might need to do to complete a certain task, which might include things that you'd never even considered, right? That's one of the big flaws that we have, is that
a quest.
Well, not even a quest, but just any idea at all. It's actually fascinating just how extensive and how capable it is. Now, there are flaws with it, right? So don't just take it and leave with it, right? You wouldn't want to use a Google Maps that is navigating you off a cliff because it's shorter to go in a straight line, for example, right? So
it might be fun to use a Google Maps that's being navigated by a ChatGPT, though. Just see what it comes up with.
That might be interesting. Yeah, just be like, hey, take me on a wild adventure, plot me a course, right?
Mm-hmm. But what's the best place? Yeah.
Exactly. But it is a fascinating tool that your creativity and your imagination could take it in wild directions. And just playing with it for an hour is, I would argue, enough to understand just the sheer impressiveness of the potential. Now, how it's monetized, the business behind it, the incentives, the political BS, the controversies aside, there is going to be AI it's here already. It's inevitable. It's here already, right? So play with it, try it, use your imagination. If you want to make a list that's productive, go for that. If you want to think of like business brainstorming, try that. If you want to do something super creative and get like concept art, or not concept art, concept thoughts, try that. Just try it, right? It's worth an hour at least, I think, for everybody online. But that was a segue that made me forget my train of thought.
Man, imagine needing a robot to use your imagination, you guys. This guy, Dregn Azabiel, you guys, man.
you guys, please. I'm augmented in so many ways. But no, oh yeah, so what I was saying earlier was also just the limitations, right? Like if I make a list of things that I need to buy at a grocery store, there's a fair chance that I forgot an item, right? It's a poor metaphor, but when it comes to like planning, it's actually interesting because more heads are better than one. As much as I would love to have a circle of collaborators just to talk and share ideas and go in just wild directions, people don't got time for that. Everyone's a lot of people, a lot of folks out there, working on their own projects, working on their own tireless days. I mean, Heck, I remember the days where me and my good bros would just hang out on a Mumble call, or gosh, I forgot what the other tools were now, since Discord is so prominent. But as time flows, right? They have to work. They have commitments to family. They have to ensure that their life is sound, and you kind of lose out on those opportunities to be at a student community center at a university campus and just play games and talk about dumb random stuff. So it's I get the way things change, but with the introduction of AI, you kind of have a wall to bounce your ideas off of. And with the way, as our perspectives change and the way the internet kind of affects us collectively as a culture, AI is an interesting board to bounce ideas off of. I will put it that way. I'll try it out, see what you think. Let me know what you think, because hell, I see people from the tech world talking about it, and they're all fascinated in the technology. They all, I think, understand to a degree the potential of it. You see, I see a bunch of YouTube videos because I'm looking up a bunch of AI stuff, and there's a bunch of people like, oh, how can you take advantage of the AI? I'm like, well, you could use it for, again, ideas, but you can't really take advantage of it. It's a tool, right? It's like saying, hey, buy this hammer and you can build a house. It's like, well, there's a little bit more to it than just buying the hammer to build a house, So it's an interesting tool to explore, and I'm excited to see how it grows, but I am also skeptical of who's driving that growth and what incentives they have to grow it.
Well, Dregn, the reason that I asked about the grammatical context of all that, which you've kind of danced around, is I'm just looking up here popularity of Dungeons and Dragons by country, and the top results are English-speaking countries, but of course every now and then you get Spanish-speaking countries, Denmark, Sweden, that sort of thing, Germany, Austria, so German-speaking countries. I just wonder, if you're building an AI DM, how many languages are you offering this in? And that's why it wouldn't matter. That's why I was asking how it performs with, like, if you're putting in like typos and bad punctuation and stuff like that. Like, how does that affect like the chat bots, AI bots that you've used? Does it mess with them? And then it just got me thinking, how difficult would it be to get this to work cross-culturally, cross-linguistically?
Yeah, so in ChatGPT, it's already at a point where it understands punctuation and language, and it can interpret. Oh my God, my brain's dying.
Interprets, perhaps?
Interpret, thank you. Yes, it can interpret the intention as long as the grammar is not so wildly illegible. So you could actually go to, say, ChatGPT, because again, that's the big one right now. And here's a I guess I don't really have a way to share it, but you could ask it questions in a foreign text and it will give you a response.
Oh, that is interesting.
You could also ask it to make a translation and it will do so. I actually just went there and was like, hey, write me a poem in Chinese. And I misspelled Chinese unintentionally. And it wrote me a poem and also was kind enough to provide me the translation in English. So when it comes to language, there's enough AI language models, or not AI, but language data sets that exist, that though it may not be super slang savvy, maybe in the near future it will. I think to a degree the English side at least is pretty slang savvy because it has just wild data sets of just what's been used online, and the internet, as we know, is a wild mess of cosmic chaos. So yeah, it's again surprisingly intelligent. It's for some probably scarily intelligent. So
well,
yeah,
I am surprised. That's for sure. You got me there.
Yeah. So if you haven't played with it, again, 1 hour, just try to break it. Yeah, see what happens. But yeah, I don't see any language-based limitations with these tools. I think it's already at a point where 98% plus of it is passable, unless you're just typing absolute gibberish, which it's also at the point where it will just respond as like, hey, I didn't understand your question.
You want to try that again, bud? Yeah, one more time. You can do it. I believe in you.
Yeah. So you could also it's also interesting because you can type a question and add intent in text to give it more information, essentially, to output not only an answer to your question, but also in a way that satisfies to a degree the intent behind the question. So yeah, ChatGPT, guys, it's for me fascinating and exciting. For a lot, it's curious and foreign and alien and scary, and maybe I don't know. Try it. Let me know what you think.
Dregn Azabiel, ever the advocate. Here's perhaps our final point of discussion tonight, you guys. What is Dungeons and Dragons as a brand, as an icon? What is it worth? Is it worth saving, worth perpetuating? What with people now determined to, sort of forge their own future into a more open style of RPGs and gameplay and licensing? Or does it still have a place in the culture? Is it still worth keeping around? Should we still be rooting for it? For me personally, I think there is, even though I don't technically play an official version of Dungeons and Dragons, I do still find that it's a touchstone, that it's still an icon, that it's still I guess it's like like any. I'm trying to think of another example here of like big,
the brand
yeah.
The brand is separate from the organization behind it, right? So I'd say D&D has existed across all the various variations. I think it's pretty well recognized that Pathfinder, right, was born from D&D. I think people will agree that Critical Role, as much as they've explored a variety of systems and expanded greatly, also with Geek and Sundry, right, where they originally came from. I think D&D as a term has enough cultural relevance where the term itself will continue to be looked at in a positive light. The problem that we have these days is the intentions and I guess the effect that of those that own the IP. And I think that's the distinction that I would make, is that it's the IP owners that you got to put the question mark on. It's also dumb to me because, you can't, Dungeons and Dragons is such a culturally common phrase. I mean,
it's such a good name. That's the thing.
It's
like Apple.
conceptual archetype.
Yeah.
It can't go away.
It's like your mom calling every video game console a Nintendo. Like it's so ubiquitous.
It's a Kleenex.
Yeah, exactly. Which little
D&D
funny
is a Kleenex.
D&D is a Kleenex. Absolutely.
There you go. Exactly. So I think D&D itself has kind of, what's the word? It's risen above Wizards of the Coast. And Wizards of the Coast is just trying its best to hang on to that balloon that has taken off. Which is a sad reality for business, but it is what it is. But also, it pisses me off that, like, DM, for example, is Dungeon Master, is such a common term that's not just synonymous with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's also...
I use it all the time, yeah. I use it in games where there's no dungeons whatsoever. I'll still refer to whoever's running it as the DM, just out of habit.
But I think it's such a term that, again, has its own cultural relevance just in the tabletop RPG sphere. Like, people will call people running any system a dungeon master, but what a lot of people don't even know is that the term dungeon master is actually trademarked by Wizards, and you're technically not supposed to use it outside of Dungeons and Dragon games. So, which is why I often refer to the old school game masters nowadays, because of that. I'm like, why the hell would you trademark dungeon master? Goon. But anyways, I think D&D is gonna continue to thrive.
I guess that just shows you the mismanagement of what they had. They didn't know how good they had it. All of this all of this cultural goodwill, all of these built-in terms that everybody's familiar with. and they just decided to blow it all up. And now we're going to be waiting, 7 years, 10 years for them to turn it around again, decide, oh, you know what? Making all of this content ourselves is kind of hard. Maybe we're going to let everybody else join in again.
That's another conversation for another day, but I am concerned. I'm not even concerned. The likelihood of what will happen is that this will blow over in the next couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Things will probably continue and people will just suck it up, because I think culturally too many people have gotten complacent and comfortable with just letting other people do the hard work. And
it's like I said, people want the official thing. Some people are going to go for it.
Yeah, so much like how as bad as everyone, as many in the gaming world agree that EA, right, Electronic Arts, is a
it's in the game. Yep.
It's killing the game. But the fact that they'll consume a business and destroy it and just it's like an organism. It's like it just consumes, and it's so hard to explain. I hate it so much. But
a malignance.
I do think that Hasbro will continue, right? They're not even getting the attention that they probably need, or it's hard to say how involved they are. But Wizard of the Coast,
the same sort of discussions came up around the Magic the Gathering 30th stuff.
Yeah.
This idea of, oh, well, is it, Wizards of the Coast being ridiculous, or is this coming from higher ups in Hasbro? Really no way to tell, but you sort of feel that, this sort of broad mismanagement could only come from someone so far removed from the ground floor.
Exactly. Exactly. We'll see what happens. But I do think that it is a niche enough of a community, unlike video games where, there's a bunch of grandmas buying their kids the next, Madden game. So that's the biggest reason why EA continues, is because those that understand the gaming world are aware of the bad of EA, but the market is so huge that we're in the minority. I think we're in the minority when it comes to that battle. But something like tabletop RPGs are such a devoted, passionate group of nerds that know a lot about it.
This is true.
I can't help but feel like there is a unique opportunity when it comes to this potential battle and the emergence of something greater from this. So we'll see. I'm excited.
Mm-hmm. I feel like what will come of this is already started with some of these other publishers pushing up their plans to make their own system and stuff like that. I think that's the big thing that's going to come out of this. D&D as a product is still going to persist. It's not going anywhere. Might be different. Might be even slightly diminished, maybe. Probably not. But it's not going anywhere.
Let's not forget that it was a ruined brand at a time, before it was sold to Wizards of the Coast and sort of revitalized. It was run into the ground back in the day and sort of uplifted again. I suppose it could happen a second time. We'll have to see.
Yeah,
could be.
Or something else will rise from the ashes. And maybe it's Paizo, maybe it's Kobold, maybe it's something in the community. But I do think, the rule in business is, if you make it easier, or more, if you do it in a way that is more, I guess, accessible, smarter, whatever the term, and overall you do something that is better, right, than your competition, it will flourish. Like somebody either will want what you just did and they'll buy it from you, or the community will rally to it because of the convenience, or again that better quote unquote factor of whatever it handles. So I think there's a lot of lessons the next wave is going to take from 5th edition's success. I have a hunch that Paizo is on that same page with whatever their next iteration is, because Paizo and Pathfinder in general has always been very, very complex and difficult for newcomers. And I think one of the biggest successes of 5th edition is the ability for new players to go and just sit at a table, virtually or real in IRL, and literally that day make a character, play a short game, and understand what the hell they did without being handheld in every decision they do.
There's a simplicity to it, you say.
Right. Or an ease of accessibility. So we'll see. We'll see
What comes of it. So,
what about you, Spaceman?
Space Cadets, remember, play whatever you like. Play your favorite things. Steal ideas whenever you can. Take bits and pieces from all over the place. Pirate heavily. You know, it's just the way to live. And of course, we'll be waiting on that latest Wizards of the Coast statement, which is supposed to be coming out this Friday in response to more of these leaks. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to say.
Got my smoker ready.
That's right. Another quick shout out
set up
for Dregn and Azabiel. Here we go. Remember to follow these two lovely co-hosts that we've got here on the show tonight. Dregn and Az.
Thanks for having us.
Dregn, when is your series going to be continuing? Have you got plans to pick that up again?
It's supposed to be this Sunday. I need to double check. We had planned to do it 2 weeks ago, but we had a couple people out, and because we took like 2 months off, I want to make sure that all the players are there when we kick it back up. So I'm hoping we can continue it this on the 22nd, Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific, which is 9 p.m. Eastern. And currently the reminder on my YouTube page is hidden until I get that date locked in. But as soon as I get confirmation from everyone, it'll be on. So soon, hopefully.
Well, perhaps your players will be reinvigorated to play a fun game with all this stuff going on. Yeah,
and actually with all this fun stuff going on, maybe that campaign will evolve in a way where it becomes more of its own system. We'll see.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Az, of course, streaming all the time. Don't forget to follow him. Anything fun coming up soon, Az, that we should keep an eye out for?
I've got my first of 2023's monthly tabletop one-shots that I'm going to be doing. That's going to be on the 22nd, which the specifics show. Time, we're just going to duke it out. We're going to cancel both streams, and we're just going to have a fist fight on camera.
Listen, I have an inherent advantage. You're in my game, bro.
That's true. It's true. But yeah, the specific times and stuff I will be throwing out on Twitter and whatnot as we get a little bit closer here, and I double check with everyone. But yeah, other than that, just doing my usual occasional gaming stream and popping in on other people's shows and stuff every now and then.
And where do you do your professional stuff?
Well, since you ask, that would be at startplaying.games/GM/Azabiel if you want to check out.
Always be plugging you guys.
Check out my stuff there, and maybe get into some tabletop goodness.
Yeah, I'll give him a 5-star.
He's a professional, you guys. What a great place to start.
Very good at improving too. Make some very, very interesting NPCs on the fly. Which is, maybe not on the fly, but their personalities are made on the fly, and it comes out really well. He's made some good characters.
Well, gents, I want to thank you both for being with us here tonight. Lovely discussions, lovely guests. I hope we'll get the opportunity to have you guys back on in the future. Hope you enjoyed your time here tonight.
Always a great time. Thanks.
Absolutely.
All right, Space Cadets, we are going to close out tonight's show. So I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in tonight, wherever and whenever you are. You can join us again on Friday. We're going to be playing a little Fall Guys, taking it easy, easing right into the weekend. Until then, of course, no matter what life throws your way, good luck and Godspeed. We'll catch you on the other side, Space Cadets. Another big thanks to our co-hosts tonight, Dregn and Azabiel. Thank you guys so much for being here. Now take care, Space Cadets. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you all again real soon.